Hey everyone, if we haven't met before, I'm Rebecca Pickens. I'm a certified book coach, developmental editor, and host of Self-Editing Essentials, a group coaching program for writers who have finished or almost finished writing their books and are ready to learn the art of self-editing. Today, I want to talk to you all about how to write a synopsis that hooks literary agents. We've been talking a lot about this in my group coaching program lately, and I just thought this is general information that all writers who are planning to pitch their novels to literary agents should be aware of. So let's go. So the first thing we want to do is just really flesh out what is a synopsis. Simply stated, it's just a concise summary of your story from beginning to end. It's usually 500 to 1,000 words, single spaced unless otherwise specified by the agent that you're submitting your synopsis to. And its general purpose is to show the plot, main characters, conflict, and resolution. So typically, this is the document that you are going to submit if an agent likes your query letter. So the first step is you find an agent that you want to pitch to, you send them your query letter, and then if they're interested, they may ask you for a synopsis. It's not a guarantee. Every agent does it differently. There are agents who want to see your synopsis at the same time as your query letter. There are agents who will never ask you for a synopsis, even if they're interested in your book. They'll just jump in and ask you for the first 50 pages or whatever it is that they want to see. But many agents still will ask you for a synopsis. And it's actually a really satisfying experience to get all those ideas about your story onto this short document. It just really can help you see things that still need a little fixing, things that are working really well. I'm working with a writer right now, in fact, who went ahead and wrote her synopsis and then realized, ooh, I have some issues with my manuscript I need to go back and fix before I actually submit this synopsis and query letter to an agent. So a synopsis can be helpful in a lot of different ways. I'm even sometimes encouraging writers to write a synopsis, even if they're not planning to submit to a traditional agent, even if they're self-publishing. A synopsis is just a fantastic way to understand what is working in your story and what may need a little bit of revision work. So next I want to talk about what the job is of the synopsis. What does it have to accomplish in order to be successful? The first thing it needs to do is convey your plot clearly and concisely. This is a marketing document and it needs to be crystal clear to the agent who is reading it what your story is about, how it works, and we want it to be as straightforward a document as possible. It should reveal major turning points and the crisis inside your story. We want to finish reading your synopsis and have a really good idea of your protagonist's arc and key relationships. Your synopsis should also demonstrate stakes and tension and resolution, and it should capture all the originality of your story and the thematic resonance, what's going to really stand out to your readers in terms of these things. There is lots of debate about the optimal length for your synopsis. Shoot for 500 to 1,000 words. If you are doing a very complicated synopsis for, say, a fantasy book that has lots of world building, lots of complexity, you're going to get away with going a little closer to the 1,000 words. But if you can do the job in 500 words, you're golden because agents are busy people and they want to really make sure they can get through these pretty quickly. So let's look at what needs to be included in your synopsis. First off are the main characters in your story. Who is it that is driving this story? Who is your protagonist? Then we want to know about the inciting incident. What is it that kicks off the conflict in your story and just plunges the reader right into this world you're creating? What are the major plot points, those key events that change your story, move your story forward, and also at the same time change your character in significant ways? What are the conflict and stakes? What is that risk for your protagonist? This is really, really important because even if you're writing a very quiet story, if you're writing something that is character driven, we still need to know that there are stakes that are going to make the reader want to turn that page. That is very important to literary agents. And resolution is really important. In your query letter, you are using that to, as that's a document to get the agent excited. to pique their curiosity so that they have to ask for more. They have to know what happened to this character. How did you get them out of it? So that element of mystery is acceptable in a query letter. In your synopsis, you want to show the agent exactly how you are going to land this ending, how this story is going to tie up in a way that feels authentic and satisfying to your audience. So we are showing literally the beginning, middle, and end of your story in, of course, a very, very abridged way. And then optionally, if you have a very unique tone to your story or a unique POV, point of view, it may be something you want to feature in your synopsis. That's optional, and that's going to be a case-by-case situation, but there's a possibility that there would be room for that in your synopsis. Okay, so now let's talk about what not to include in your synopsis. Remember, we're looking at a pretty small document, right? We don't have a lot of space here. So the things that make their way into your synopsis are there for a very specific reason. There's a lot that we want to leave out. The first thing is minor subplots or lesser characters who may be near and dear to us, may be really neat aspects of your story, but do not belong in your synopsis. We also want to avoid a tendency to add detailed dialogue or scene by scene descriptions, right? Think about a small child who's really excited about a show they just saw or film they've just watched, and they go on and on and on, right? Telling and telling and telling what's happened. We want to make sure that we're not doing the adult version of that in our synopsis letter or in our synopsis. We want to be really sure that we are choosing those essential elements that are going to pull together a story that is enticing to the agent. Excessive backstory is another detail we want to eliminate. We only need to include backstory that directly impacts that main plot. And avoiding editorial commentary, why I wrote this book, that first person kind of level of detail does not belong in a synopsis either. So we're going to go now through a step-by-step guide on how to work with your synopsis. The first thing really is to understand the job. We've talked a little bit about that already. A synopsis is not a writing sample. I have a lot of clients when I'm working on pitch packages with them, they want to make sure that their synopsis is creative and it sparkles and they're using their most artistic, creative voice. And I love that. And that's why I love working with writers because that is my favorite voice in the world. However, the synopsis is not the place to show that voice. That's what your novel is for. The synopsis is a professional document and it doesn't need to sparkle. It needs to sell. It needs to sell your prospective literary agent on the idea that you understand craft, you understand the key components of it. You know how to start, maintain and finish a novel in a way that's cohesive and compelling and professional. And so we don't want a stylistic performance. This is a really straightforward exercise. We also don't want a compressed version of the novel's prose. We're not really trying to replicate the novel that you've written. So what is a synopsis? It is a demonstration of story intelligence. And what I mean by that, I've just talked about that a little bit a minute ago, is that you understand craft. You understand how to build a story that engages and maintains the interest of a reader. It's proof that you understand cause and consequence and resolution, all those features that have to come together to make a story work. And it's also a professional tool to use for decision making, both for your decision making and for the agents. It helps you, like I said earlier, make sure that everything in your story is working well. If you get to the synopsis and it's too difficult to write, you may be getting some really valuable data there. There may be something really fundamental that needs some realignment in your story. And then it's a decision-making tool for your agent to decide if this is a story that they can effectively sell to a publisher. So next, I want to talk about some tone and style tips that will ensure that your synopsis is professional and very easy for agents to work with. First, it's expected that you'll write in present tense and an active voice. Even if your novel does not use this style, this is the style you will use for your synopsis. You want to keep it really objective and not promotional. This is not marketing copy. This is not a book blurb or jacket copy. This is a professional document that simply gives the agent an idea of what your story contains. So it's professional, but it's not salesy. And we want to just be sure to avoid purple prose and over explaining things that are going to slow down the agent. The, the sad truth is you're going to spend hours and hours working on your synopsis. I spend hours with the writers I coach, helping them with their synopsis. It's a time consuming task to get it right. But your agent that you're pitching is going to read this very quickly. And so while you're working on the one hand to make sure all these key components are contained in your synopsis, you also want to make sure that what you're creating is a highly skimmable document. So wherever you can, use brevity, be succinct, be economical with your words so the agent can really get through your synopsis with ease. Okay, common pitfalls I see all the time when I'm working with writers on their synopsis, being too vague, leaving out key plot points. I honestly don't see that very often. What I see more often, though obviously you want to avoid that, but what I see much more often is too much detail, where the story reads like a novel, not a summary of the novel. So again, think back to that 5-year-old who comes back from the movies so excited and tells his parents every single painstaking detail, right, about the story. And the listener's eyes start to glaze over. It's a lot to absorb. We don't want to do that to an agent. We want to make sure that the key details are what are being included. And sometimes when I make this suggestion to a writer that I'm working with, they will push back and say, "Yeah, but they have to know about character XYZ because they did these things and it's really amazing and I don't want them to miss out on that." And I gave this example in my group coaching program the other day. I was saying that if we were talking to a specific member in the group, and I said, let's imagine that we just found out that this person um, was in the circus when she was younger, and she did a flying trapeze act. We'd be floored. We'd be so excited. Wow, never knew she was in the circus, never knew she did this amazing thing. Even if we didn't know that she also had a background in, I don't know, she's a lion tamer, right? I think that's the example I used. That's really exciting too, and I want to know about that someday. But not knowing that does not take away from maybe the main point that this person was in the circus and was a flying trapeze artist, right? That story doesn't suffer for us not knowing this other wild fun fact about them. So have faith that if your synopsis is good enough, the agent thinks they can sell your story, they're going to read your whole story and they're going to find out about all those other neat details. Your primary plot point isn't going to suffer because they don't know all of these other things. So it's hard, it's a little bit heartbreaking not to be able to include all these neat things, but it's better to really address that main plot point with depth and thoroughness rather than trying to put too many other things into your synopsis and really watering it down. Um, Sometimes we we hear a lot, don't include the ending in a query letter, which is good advice. And unfortunately, some people then apply that to their synopsis too. And as I said just a few minutes ago, we have to see that ending in your synopsis. That is a really important feature. It is what tells your agent that you know how to land this story, you know where it ends, you know how to seal the deal. So always include your ending in the synopsis. Even if it's an open-ended ending, that's okay too. You don't have to have a perfect red bow and wrap everything up neatly. If your novel doesn't do that, that's okay. But you want to show that that's intentional. You want to avoid excessive backstory or side plots. We've talked about that already. Passive voice, flowery language, and overwriting. Okay, so now let's dive in and actually start thinking about what your synopsis is going to look like. First of all, you want to strip the story to its spine. What is that core element that makes your story your unique story? So I recommend pulling out a notebook, just going old school, grab a pen, grab, a hot drink is essential, of course, to join you in this process. And then just asking yourself these very simple questions and responding to them in very plain language. Who is your protagonist? What do they want? What disrupts their life? What stands in their way? And what will happen if they fail? This is your story's structural spine. This is the thing that's bringing everything else together. If this is unclear to you, you're not going to make it clear to the agent, and the synopsis will not work. So you want to define the story goal. This is not your theme. This is an external goal about what the character is trying to do. What is this goal? And we're thinking about all the obstacles in the way of that goal. And then for step 3, let's map the major plot turns. We want to think about first that inciting incident, which we've discussed, the moment when the story becomes unavoidable. Something happens that sets that ball in motion, and now it's just going to keep going forward. What is that thing? Your next plot point that you want to consider is the escalation. When an inciting incident happens and your character starts to move forward to deal with it, it would be a very short story if they were able to deal with whatever that was without any kind of obstacles. Your job as a writer is to start throwing those obstacles at them. 2 or 3 major obstacles that really increase the pressure on your character should be included in your synopsis so we can see exactly what those are. Then we want to see, what is the crisis? What is that point of no return for your character where whatever is about to happen makes so many things inevitable, and it kind of locks in that ending for your character. Finally, we're going to have the climax and then the resolution. What is the aftermath and the consequences for your character? Step 4 is making sure that you can establish a clear cause and effect. So every time you include a plot point, you want to think about the following. You want to say, because this happens, this character must do this, which leads to this. I've got dominoes here, right? Because every action has a reaction. If events feel too episodic and you're just doing a laundry list of these different things that happen, if they feel too loosely connected, an agent is going to notice that immediately. So you could have fantastic, fantastic plot points that are really compelling and interesting on their own. But if they don't connect, if we don't understand the cause and effect that they are setting into motion, it's just not going to have the cohesion that an agent is looking for. We want to think about that character arc really strategically and how you layer that into your synopsis. So the places where I recommend focusing are on what belief or behavior is challenged. How, by whatever your big inciting incident is, how do external events force your character to confront these changes, to confront these challenges, and to navigate them? And by the end of your story, what has shifted for your character? You want to always be thinking, how do they start and how do they end? And how do I make that clear to the literary agent reading the synopsis? What we want to avoid in the synopsis is explaining psychology at too much length. That's what the novel is for. We don't want to hammer our agent over the head explaining what the theme is too explicitly. Likewise, we don't want to do that in the novel either. That's unpleasant. But we want to just always make sure we're not overstating things that require more nuance. We don't want to overinterpret the story for the agent. And we want to just use action. We want to use plot points that reveal the change for the character, rather than telling our agent what the character's changes are. It's also important when thinking about other characters to reference in the synopsis, who's going to get in there besides your protagonist. The only people that you want to include would be those who are creating pressure directly upon your protagonist. They may also mirror or challenge the protagonist's major flaw. That can be kind of interesting to see in a synopsis. But ultimately, they need to affect the outcome that you are describing in your synopsis. So you want to avoid doing some kind of a laundry list or a relationship inventory of every single character that's in your story. Your synopsis is not a place to tend to any of those minor emotional threads. Remember that lion tamer example, right? We'll get there. They will, if they ask for pages, they're going to see all of that. They know when they read a synopsis, they're not getting the full picture. So leave those minor emotional threads, put those aside, and side characters who don't have a major consequence on the major plot points that you're describing. So for step 7, we're going to think about how to handle subplots. And for this, I really would love if you would put on your editor's hat and think about how to get yourself in a really objective state of mind. And in doing so, we're going to drill down on these questions. For every subplot that you're considering including in your synopsis, ask yourself, does this subplot force a decision for your character? Does it force a very specific and very central question for them? Does it alter the protagonist's trajectory in a very significant way? Does it affect the climax or resolution of your story? If it does, you may summarize that in 1 or 2 or 3 sentences, so very succinctly. It probably does need to be there in order to understand how this all comes together. But if it does not, you'll want to cut it completely. It does not belong in the synopsis. It will only slow down the agent and possibly confuse them. If you want more on subplots, I have a video on my channel all about subplots, and I'll actually stick a link in the comments section for you to take a look at. That can be helpful in terms of thinking about some of these questions. Okay, step 8, integrating world building where necessary. So world building, especially if you're doing fantasy, high fantasy with lots of complicated story matter, that can be very difficult to capture in a synopsis. And these are the writers I work with who have the most difficulty in terms of feeling like, oh, I'm leaving all the best stuff out. I don't want to leave this out, but it doesn't fit. So I've put this slide together to hopefully make this a little simpler for you. And this applies to all kinds of storytelling, but I do find that it's most complicated for the genres I've mentioned. So world building only needs to enter at a point of friction, not as an explanation in your synopsis. So I'm going to give you 2 examples of world building details. And I'm going to show you one that works and one that doesn't. So the one that works: in a city where memories can be legally erased, her refusal to comply makes her a target. Okay, that's a good sentence. Now let's look at this one. The city operates under a complex system of memory regulation introduced decades earlier. In the first example, we see how these details are complicating the world and complicating the choices and obstacles and all the things that your character is going to have to navigate. It doesn't simply show an element of the world and how it functions. Whereas in the second sentence, we're really not learning anything about your characters or about the story. We're just learning about this element of the world that you've crafted. So it's interesting, the sentence is fine, but it doesn't serve your synopsis well. So there's a fine difference there. So now let's take a look at some of the world building pitfalls that I often see. Remember, world building should enter at the point of friction, not explanation. So let that be a mantra for you. So complex worlds can overwhelm the reader. We don't want to just throw lots of different details without context and understanding. We want to include only what's necessary to understand the specific plot and stakes that you have deemed necessary for your synopsis. So that's going to leave out a whole bunch of world building details, but they have that to look forward to seeing once they request pages. We want to avoid lengthy exposition, like you saw in that example that I just offered a minute ago, and we want to summarize only super unique elements very, very quickly with as few words as possible, and always with a focus on how the world affects the story and characters. Remember, it's all about the story and it's all about the people living in your story. those world building details are just things for your characters to respond to. So we need to make sure they're put in their place in that way. When we start thinking about how to draft your synopsis, we've talked about this already a little bit, present tense, active voice, clear declarative sentences, right? We don't want anything to be too tentative. This is a professional document you're using to sell your idea, so you want to be very confident. And no stylistic mimicry of the novel's voice. There's no need to try to if you're writing a really voicey first person character, we don't need that voice in your synopsis. You want to aim for authority without ornament. And what I mean by that is obviously you are a writer and you are using this document to show your writing chops, to show that you are sophisticated, that you have a way with words, but you do not want to use this as a place to really focus on really stylistic, flowery language. We want this to be concise. We want to be able to compress the story without losing its meaning. So when you go, this is a document that you'll revise several times, I'm sure. So that first time when you're going through to revise the first draft, you want to look for redundancy, replace abstractions with specifics. So we want to get really, really, really granular here because the more specific your details, the more real those details feel, the more compelling and interesting they are. We don't want the agent to have to guess and imagine what your story is about. We want them to know what your story is about. We want to remove any kind of hedging language that really distances the character, or rather the reader, from the story. So that's a form of revision I work on quite a bit with the writers that I see. We want to tighten transitions from scene to scene so that everything is very fluid. And we want to always keep this question at the forefront of our minds. Can this be read quickly without losing clarity? Is this document skimmable? Be constantly asking yourself that. Have some empathy for that agent who's got 25 more synopses waiting for them that night. And we can do a stress test for editorial readability. Read the synopsis just like an editor would. Can you follow the story on a skim? Do you understand why each event matters? Does it feel significant enough? Is the ending clear and satisfying? Do you trust the writer's narrative judgment? If you were looking at your own work, would you say this is someone who has studied craft and understands how to tell a story? If the answer is no at any point, no problem, just go back and revise. I did have a client ask me recently, okay, what I really like my writing voice and I really like the voice that I use in my story, and I don't want my synopsis to be boring. So she was really asking, is there a middle ground? Can I still create a professional synopsis, but not lose my artist voice, not lose the thing that makes my writing special? And what I told that person and what I'll tell you is yes, but clarity is always the priority. That straightforward information that makes the job easy for the literary agent to say yes or no, that is the number one goal. Clear, neutral, professional writing. That doesn't mean the story needs to be flat or lifeless. There are definitely some techniques you can use to make sure that the story does still stand out in a very crowded inbox. Even though this is a professional document, and it's probably not going to be as much fun as writing your novel, and it's not going to feel quite as much fun as talking in the character, maybe of a first person point of view character, there are still things we can do to elevate this document and make it a compelling read for the agent. And the main ways I recommend doing that is really just drilling down into specific details, because those are always what will do the best to bring a scene to life. So you want to aim for showing the very specific actions that your character acts on. We want to see the concrete consequences of their actions, and we want really super specific, clear emotional stakes. This is not a time to be particularly nuanced or having the agent work too hard to find these things. We want to make it pretty clear, and we want to do it in language that is vivid and energetic and always specific. So the key takeaways are really that a synopsis is an act of professional clarity. It's a document that helps not only the agent understand your story, but I would argue it can help the writer figure out the story just as much. It says you know your story, you know what matters in your story, you respect your reader's time, and you are capable of delivering a complete narrative, which I know you are. So if this is helpful, I would be so thankful if you would hit like and subscribe. I drop videos just like this one every Tuesday. And if you have a specific question you'd like to ask me, it may wind up in a video just like this one, so please send it in the comments section and I'll do my best to answer it. Also, I want to invite you to my free writing sprint that I host every Wednesday at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. We get together for an hour and just write and write and write. It is such a satisfying part of my week, and the writers who participate tell me it's one of the most productive hours they enjoy each week. If you would like to join us, we would love to have you there. I'm going to put a link in the comments section so you can subscribe to get calendar updates about this event. All right, happy writing, everyone. Please keep in touch and let me know how it's going in the comments section.